You ever get that feeling like you just know something, but you can't explain how? You feel a shift in the room, a flicker of emotion in someone's voice, or a tension hanging in the air before anything's even said. You call it intuition, a gut feeling, a sixth sense. And maybe, for most of your life, you've believed it's your gift, your edge, your silent radar in a loud world. But what if it's not? What if that so-called intuition, your deepest knowing, isn't guiding you? What if it's trapping you? That's not some mystical fear tactic. It's the exact kind of question Carl Jung wanted us to ask. Because to Jung, intuition wasn't just a magic compass. It was a blade sharp, powerful, but double-edged. And when left unchecked, it could lead a man straight into delusion, isolation, even self-destruction. But let's be real. If you're someone who often feels out of place, if you find yourself thinking too much, sensing too deeply, if people often say you're too quiet, too sensitive, too strange this video is for you, you're not broken, but you are in danger. Not because of others, because of how you've been told to treat that internal voice you call intuition. Jung saw this type of man long before modern psychology slapped labels on everyone. He called him the introverted intuitive, a man tuned not to the world outside, but to the images, patterns, and archetypes within. You see things others don't. You feel events before they happen. You connect dots without needing evidence. You speak in metaphors. And sometimes the world responds with confusion or worse. Silence. So you retreat. You protect your inner visions like a sacred fire. You stop sharing them. You stop explaining yourself. You live in your head, in your symbols, in the shadows of what might be. But here's the part. No one tells you that silence, that withdrawal. It's not neutral. It's corrosive. And over time, it doesn't protect you. It consumes you. Jung warned that without expression. Intuition becomes fantasy. Without grounding, it becomes illusion. You start to believe your inner visions are reality. You confuse archetypes with identity. You stop discerning whether what you know is wisdom or projection. And the moment you do that, you're no longer guided by your mind. You're possessed by it. This is where men like you begin to spiral. Not visibly, not with drama, but quietly, inwardly, in ways that others can't see but you feel every single day. You begin to drift from the present. You start forgetting the ground beneath your feet. And in your effort to preserve your truth, you lose contact with what's real. You tell yourself you're different, that no one understands, that the world just doesn't get your depth, your insight, your uniqueness. Maybe that's true, but maybe it's also your excuse. Because deep down, you're afraid. Afraid that your visions might be wrong. Afraid that if you speak them out loud, they'll fall apart. So you hide behind silence and call it self-protection. You hide behind knowing and call it wisdom. You hide behind distance and call it clarity. But Jung knew better. He understood that the mind, left alone too long, becomes an echo chamber. That intuition, when it's not integrated, begins to lie. It whispers what you want to hear. It feeds your fantasies, and worst of all, it tells you to trust it blindly. That's the trap. You stop asking questions. You stop doubting. You stop testing what you feel against the real world, and slowly, you stop evolving. Intuition becomes a prison when it's not challenged, when it's not put into words, when it's not grounded in action. And this is where men begin to fall apart without anyone noticing. Not because they lack intelligence, not because they lack potential, but because they live entirely in a world no one else can access. A world where the line between truth and imagination fades more each day. Here's what Jung saw: the introverted intuitive, when disconnected from sensation, from the body, the present moment, the physical world starts to drown in symbols. He mistakes every coincidence for a sign, every gut feeling for prophecy, every mood swing for meaning, and in that fog, he loses his edge, because intuition was never meant to stand alone. It's a compass, not a destination. It's a signal, not a command. It tells you where to look, not what to believe. But if you stop questioning it, it becomes a god. And that's when you start worshiping your own illusions. You see, the real power of intuition is not just in what it shows you, it's in what you do with it. That's the part no one teaches, no school, no book. No one hands you the map for turning raw vision into reality. But Jung hinted at it. He showed us the danger of an unexpressed symbol, the risk of inner knowledge that has no outlet. Because if you don't give form to what you feel, it will turn against you. That form expression isn't optional, it's survival. It doesn't have to be a painting or a poem. It doesn't need to be beautiful or understood. But it has to be real. It has to exist outside of your mind. Because until it does, it owns you. Jung watched this happen to people. Patients who saw things in dreams, who carried symbols like burdens, people who felt everything, but said nothing. And he noticed something dark when they didn't express their visions. Those visions began to express them through anxiety, through obsession, through disconnection. You've felt this, haven't you? That slow drift away from others. Not because you're better, not because you're enlightened, but because part of you is scared that if you show the world what's inside you, it will break you. But hiding it is what really breaks you. So what does it look like, this act of expression? Start small. Write what you feel, even if it sounds insane. Speak out loud to the wall if you have to. Move your body when words fail. Sketch the image you can't forget. Turn your symbol into something physical, something real. This is how you reclaim your power, not by mastering your intuition, but by meeting it, face to face, with your hands, your body, your breath, your will. Because here's the truth most men never hear. Your mind is not the enemy. Your depth is not the problem. But without a way to release it, you will turn on yourself. You'll become the prisoner of your own gift. Carl Jung wasn't romantic about intuition. He respected it. Yes, but he also feared it when it wasn't paired with integration, because he knew what it could do to a man. It could isolate him. It could inflate his ego. It could twist archetype into identity and make him think he was a prophet, when in fact, he was just lost. And that's the next trap: inflation. When your intuition isn't expressed, it starts to feed the ego. And the ego loves the idea of being special, being chosen, being the only one who sees the truth. You stop listening to feedback. You reject people who question you. You begin to believe that doubt is beneath you. But that belief, that's not wisdom. That's the unconscious taking over. And Jung warned when that happens, your conscious mind is no longer in charge. You've become a vessel for the archetypes that should have been integrated. You're not using intuition anymore. You're being used by it. That's when men start to isolate, not for protection, but for superiority. They say, "No one understands me." When what they really mean is, "No one worships my perception the way I do." This is where the danger becomes real. Because now, intuition isn't a quiet voice anymore. It's a megaphone inside your head, and it tells you everything you want to hear. You no longer test your ideas. You no longer check them against reality. You just assume they're right because they feel right. And here's the truth. Feeling right isn't the same as being right. Jung knew that. He saw it in the faces of those who came to him gifted minds, deep souls, broken by their own visions, you see? When you start confusing intuition with authority, you lose your grip on humility. And once you lose that, you stop growing. Because real growth comes from friction, from testing what you think you know, from staying grounded while your mind flies. That's the paradox. Intuition needs resistance. It needs challenge. It needs grounding. Otherwise, it turns into a fantasy that justifies anything. And here's what that looks like. You isolate. Not because people are toxic, but because they threaten your worldview. You shut down conversations. Not because they're wrong, but because you can't tolerate not being right. You start seeing yourself as the only awake one. And that illusion of being more conscious, more aware, more advanced is spiritual ego in disguise. Jung called this inflatio when the ego is inflated by unconscious material. It's like pouring gasoline on intuition. It burns, it dazzles, it consumes. And eventually, it leaves nothing behind. Just a man sitting alone with all his symbols, convinced he's reached the peak when in fact, he's built a fortress around a wound. So what's the way out? It's not to shut off your intuition. It's not to doubt every feeling you have. It's to bring it into the world, to express it, to test it, to walk with it rather than worship it. Because intuition doesn't make you special. It gives you responsibility to communicate, to build, to connect, to serve something bigger than your ego. And that's the part most people miss. They think inner vision is about power, but it's about service. Jung didn't want you to follow your intuition blindly. He wanted you to understand it, to meet it like a partner, not a master. Because if you don't, you'll end up mistaking your prison for your truth. Let's bring it down to earth. If you're the kind of man who's been carrying too much inside, who senses things he can't explain, who walks through life with a quiet weight pressing against his chest, you need to hear this. You're not here to be understood by everyone, but you are here to understand yourself. Not just in theory, not just in silence, but in action. You might think you're protecting something sacred by keeping it hidden, but there's nothing sacred about silence that becomes decay. Carl Jung wasn't afraid of intuition. He was afraid of what happens when it isn't lived out. And living it out means doing the hard thing. It means translating feeling into words. It means sharing your truth without needing to be agreed with. It means finding form for what haunts you. Because when you don't, your own mind becomes your battlefield. Your depth becomes your drowning. Your inner world becomes a trap. It's not enough to feel deeply. It's not enough to see beneath the surface. You need to build something from what you see. That's where real transformation happens. And I'll tell you this, the men who don't find a way to ground their intuition, they slowly lose contact with life. Not all at once, not in a loud crash, but in the little moments. They stop listening. They stop moving. They stop engaging. They start living in a story only they can read. And they call it truth. But it's not truth. It's just isolation dressed in wisdom's clothing. Don't let that happen to you. Your gift, your sensitivity, your vision, your depth. It isn't meant to separate you. It's meant to give you language. It's meant to help you guide others through the darkness. But first, you have to walk through your own, with your eyes open and your ego in check. You have to be willing to ask, is this real? Is this useful? Is this just about me? Or is it meant to serve something more? That's the difference between the lost intuitive and the integrated man. The lost intuitive thinks his visions make him untouchable. The integrated man tests his visions against reality and builds something lasting from them. He doesn't run from sensation. He doesn't dismiss his body, his habits, the mundane things. He embraces them because he knows without them, he'll float away. And floating might feel free at first, but eventually, it becomes drifting. And drifting becomes disappearing. And disappearing isn't freedom. It's surrender to the very thing you once thought made you powerful. The man who refuses to come back to his body, who refuses to ground his intuition in the real, slowly begins to vanish not from the eyes of others, but from himself. It starts with disconnection. You stop caring about the little things. You lose the joy of simple presence. You skip the rituals that once anchored you. You avoid structure because it feels limiting when in truth, it's the very thing you need to stay whole. This is what Jung tried to show us. That intuition without embodiment is unstable. That depth without form collapses. And that a man disconnected from his senses is a man walking without a map, chasing visions he can no longer translate. So what's the antidote ritual? Simplicity, practice, action. Start with what grounds you: touch, movement, routine. These are not the enemies of your inner world. They are its support beams. You don't have to become a monk. You don't have to renounce your depth, but you do have to hold it differently. With structure, with awareness, with humility. The more powerful your inner vision, the more discipline it requires. Otherwise, it turns against you. Think of it like a fire, contained. It warms the room, uncontained. It burns down your house. So ask yourself, are you tending to your fire or are you letting it consume you? This is the line Jung drew between the visionary who contributes to the world and the dreamer who disappears into it. Because when a man uses his intuition to build, he becomes more than just insightful. He becomes useful. He becomes trusted. He becomes a man others can turn to not because he claims to know everything, but because he knows how to stay present even when things don't make sense. He's not chasing validation. He's not waiting to be seen. He's expressing what must be expressed without apology, without ego, without the need to be praised or pitied. He creates, he moves, he lives. He lives in two worlds, but he doesn't get lost in either. He knows how to travel inward, but he always returns. That's what makes him dangerous in the best way. He's not just a thinker. He's not just a feeler. He's a force, because he's learned to take what's invisible and give it shape, to take what's symbolic and make it practical, to take what's intuitive and make it true. Most men never do this. They either drown in their intellect or lose themselves in their emotions. But very few learn the balance, the alchemy of integration. That's what Carl Jung's warning was really about. He wasn't telling you to distrust your inner world. He was telling you not to worship it, not to become owned by it. The moment you start believing your feelings are facts and that your inner truth is more important than shared reality, you cross into dangerous territory, because from there, it's a short walk to resentment, to grandiosity, to loneliness, disguised as enlightenment. And let me tell you, it's easy to get there, especially when the world doesn't understand your mind, especially when people don't see your depth, don't mirror your intensity, don't meet you where you are. You start to believe the lie. That being different means being above. That being misunderstood makes you superior. That isolation is proof of genius. But that's not depth. That's ego in costume. And that costume gets heavier every day you wear it. So how do you take it off by returning? Not to the crowd, not to the noise, but to the body, to the practice, to the presence that doesn't need to be seen to be real. By remembering that insight means nothing if it doesn't change how you live, you can write all the journals in the world, you can dream, reflect, analyze for decades, but if you don't move, if you don't act, you're just circling your own shadow. And Jung didn't want you circling. He wanted you walking straight into your fear, straight into your blind spots, straight into the uncomfortable, physical, messy, real world where your intuition is forced to prove itself, because only then do you know it's real. Only then can it serve you. Only then can you serve others. And maybe that's the shift you've been avoiding. You've spent years building a fortress in your mind, a place where things make sense, where you're in control, where your insight goes unchallenged. But that fortress is getting cold. You know it. You've felt it. The walls that once protected you now feel like they're pressing in. That's not failure. That's the call to come back to life. Carl Jung understood this process. He called it individuation, the path toward becoming whole. Not perfect, not enlightened, but whole. That means bringing every part of yourself into alignment. The visionary and the laborer, the philosopher and the father, the thinker and the doer, the man of the inner world and the man who still wakes up, makes his bed, and faces the real world without flinching. Intuition is a part of you, a sacred one, but it's not all of you. And if you treat it like it is, you'll start building your identity around something that was never meant to hold your weight. That's what leads to collapse, not because your insight was wrong, but because your foundation was missing. So build the foundation. Start now. Wherever you are, even if no one gets it, even if it's small, slow, quiet, build it anyway. The world doesn't need more men lost in visions. It needs more men who can translate them, who can step out of the dream and into the fire, who can stand in both worlds and not be broken by either. Jung knew that most people wouldn't do this work because it's not glamorous. It doesn't earn applause. It demands humility, repetition, and self-confrontation. But if you're still here, if you've listened this far, you're not most people. You're one of the few. The rare kind willing to face what lives in the dark and bring it into the light, not for ego, but for integration. And maybe you've always known this, that your depth isn't a curse, it's a responsibility. Not to escape, not to dominate, but to live fully, honestly, and without illusion. So live, not just in your ideas, not just in your insight. Live in your hands, in your breath, in the way you walk into a room, not needing to say much, but grounded in something unshakable. That's real power, and it's not loud. It doesn't need a stage. It doesn't come from being admired. It comes from alignment, from knowing that what you feel inside matches what you build outside, that your life is no longer just a reflection of thoughts, but a reflection of choices, of action, of integrity. Too many men stay stuck at the doorway of this work. They peek inside, maybe read a few Jung quotes, watch a few videos, write some moody journal entries, and then they stop because it gets uncomfortable. It starts requiring something more than cleverness. It starts asking them to change. And change isn't poetic. It's gritty. It's repetitive. It's often invisible. But the man who shows up for that work, day after day, without recognition, without waiting for the world to validate him, he becomes solid, reliable, unshakable. And he's rare. Because most people aren't willing to trade fantasy for structure. They'd rather feel special than be whole. But that's not you, not anymore. You're here. And you're beginning to see that intuition alone isn't the goal. Wholeness is living from the core, not the edge. Being able to feel deeply and still show up to the day's demands. Being able to carry powerful insight without letting it turn into silent resentment. The real work is integration. Taking the symbol and giving it legs. Taking the dream and making it do the dishes. Taking the deepest truths and walking them into your conversations, your business, your habits, your relationships, because that's what makes a man trustworthy. Not how much he knows, but how much of what he knows he's willing to live out. That's the frontier. Not escaping into thought, but bringing thought home. Where it matters, where it changes something. And this is where most men stop. Right at the edge. Right when the fire starts asking something back. They've had the insight. They've felt the breakthrough, but instead of building, they retreat. Back into the comfort of inner knowing. Back into the idea of, I already understand. But understanding is cheap without application. Wisdom without embodiment is noise. Carl Jung wasn't interested in men who simply had dreams. He cared about those who could carry the dream into the real world. Men who knew that self-awareness without responsibility is self-deception. If you want to escape that trap, you need to get honest about what you've avoided. What have you refused to express? Because you were afraid it would be misunderstood. What have you convinced yourself is too deep for the world, when really, you're just scared to be wrong? What part of your inner world have you romanticized because you didn't want to risk bringing it into a space where it might not survive contact with reality? That's the real test. Not whether your insights are beautiful, but whether they can hold weight, whether they can serve others, whether they can stand the pressure of the world. Because when they do, when your truth becomes action, when your inner alignment becomes outer integrity, something shifts. People begin to trust you. Not because you're loud, not because you're perfect, but because you're consistent. And consistency is rare. It's rare to find a man who means what he says, who knows what he believes, and who lives in alignment with both. That man doesn't need to talk about his intuition. He embodies it. In how he listens, in how he leads, in how he navigates uncertainty without losing himself. He doesn't flinch when others doubt him. Because he's already tested himself, already walked through the fire of his own illusions, and came out on the other side, not as someone who knows everything, but as someone who can be with anything. That's the kind of strength the world is starving for. And that's the kind of man you're capable of becoming, but only if you stop hiding behind your depth. Only if you stop mistaking silence for mystery. Only if you stop using intuition as a shield and start using it as a tool. Not to prove something, but to build something. So build, not just a theory, not just a worldview, build a life. One where your inner voice doesn't just echo in your head, it's reflected in your choices, your discipline, your presence. Where people don't just hear your ideas, they feel your alignment. Start with the simplest things, a consistent morning routine, a promise kept, a conversation you've been avoiding, a truth you've been withholding, especially from yourself. This is the grounding Jung spoke of. Not in philosophy, but in practice, because for all his brilliance, Jung knew something basic. A man is only as strong as what he can sustain. Not just what he can feel, imagine, or intuit, but what he can carry with his body, with his habits, with his daily decisions. That's where intuition becomes wisdom, and wisdom becomes leadership. But it starts with you. With being brutally honest about where your intuition has become a hiding place, about where you've been more devoted to being special than being solid, with being willing to lay down the fantasy in exchange for something that lasts. And yeah, it will cost you. It'll cost you your comfort, your spiritual ego, your illusion of control. But what you gain is something unshakable, a sense of self that isn't based on being right, but on being real. A life that isn't built on escape, but on embodiment. And when you have that, when you've faced your own chaos, named your shadows, and shaped your visions into form, then you'll understand why Jung didn't just admire intuition. He respected it. He feared it because he knew its power, and he knew the kind of man it could create or destroy. So now the question isn't, do you have deep insight? The question is, what are you doing with it? Because if you're not building something real, then what you call intuition might just be another trap. To be continued.